Today we are going to be doing part 2 of a series. Next week will be part 3 because there's a lot to unpack in this research that's really showing that maybe for many people that are suffering with multiple sclerosis, that a malaria type parasite could be causing their symptoms. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha, and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. And I love talking about these topics because this is really what saved my life. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis back in 1988. And by learning early on that infections, parasites were causing my symptoms, were causing the disease that I was diagnosed with, that's really what set me on a different path. That is what has allowed me to live for over 30 years free of multiple sclerosis. And I am so passionate about helping others really discover the cause of their disease and how to treat it and how to get their life back. Because once you get your life back, there's almost no greater joy. So the topic today, we're going to talk a little bit about a study. This is a review where researchers have looked at a whole bunch of different findings over many years that are linking MS with a malaria type parasite. And so it might not always be the same type of, and it's called a protist. It's a single cell parasite. And in this study, they're really looking at malaria. And there are different types of protists that can cause malaria. So it's like cousins of, they're not always exactly the same genus and species. So, but whether it's Babesia, whether it's malaria, this is a really important topic to discuss. So the big thing I think to start off with is most people wouldn't believe that we could possibly have a malaria infection or a malarial infection because we haven't traveled to countries that are epidemic where they have a lot of malaria. But nothing could be further from the truth. Apparently, back in the early, the 1920s and 30s, they had to treat malaria in the United States. And so malaria was in North America, which I didn't know before all this research. So I did a previous video, which was more of an introduction, which really showed the over 100 years of evidence of linking MS and these malarial parasitic infections. So make sure to go and watch that video after this if you haven't seen it already, because that's really what I'm sharing a lot of, today we're talking about one review, but in that blog and videos, we have it on our website, Live Disease Free. And we also have the video either on Facebook and YouTube. And that was done a couple of weeks ago. And you'll see that was about a study that was done in Alberta, Canada. I think it's Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where they found that giving people that had primary progressive multiple sclerosis, so the most aggressive form of MS, where they really don't have a lot of options to give for patients, those patients being on an anti-malarial drug for about a year and a half, it really significantly decreased their disability. So the amount of the drug they gave wasn't to cure malaria, but it definitely is an anti-malarial drug. It really slowed it down. And to see that much of a significant difference, so I shared a lot of other things there also. Just want to make sure you guys can see me. Just make sure to put in the comments, hi Pam, put your questions in the comments. Good, I just want to make sure that you're there. Good, awesome, because you never know with technology. So make sure to watch that video. But in this study, their conclusion was that they found that looking at different studies that had been done in the past, where they were able to find antibodies against malaria in about 40% of the MS patients. And so remember, these tests are not always exact or accurate. So 40% finding the antibodies of malaria in MS patients is really, really significant, and also found the actual parasites in 20% of MS patients. This was just like a couple of studies, so this is not conclusive, but it should have been a sounding board for more and more research to take place. And so they found that, but then they also compared epidemiological studies, kind of like where MS is and where malaria is. And they also compared the symptoms of malaria and also the symptoms of MS. And when they looked at all kinds of other infectious agents, parasites, they found that this really, malaria was the only agent that they could find, the only parasite that they could find that had a lot of similarities with where it's located with MS, but also, and we'll talk more about that because you might be thinking, well, malaria is in the hot countries and MS is in like Canada, for example, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. So with considering the symptom comparisons, considering finding malaria in MS patients and finding antibodies for malaria and the parasites in MS patients, and also the location of MS and malaria, there's a lot of evidence that's linking the two together. And before I continue, I'm not saying that every single person that has MS, that it's only malaria that's causing their symptoms. So there could be other parasites located in the central nervous system that can give us MS-type symptoms. Absolutely. We talked about the filarial worms. We've talked about Borrelia. There's over 100-year evidence of Borrelia, which is the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, also present in MS. We know fungal overgrowth. So there are multiple infections, but I believe that this is a really big one for sure. So when they were trying to find antibodies against malaria in MS patients, they found antibodies on the first try, found it really easy to find the antibodies. Only one person, they had to do 2 tries and they found the antibodies. And they've also found that when they had control, so healthy people that are the controls in the studies, 0 of them had antibodies to malaria. So the healthy people, they couldn't find any antibodies to malaria, and in MS, it was up to 40% that they found, and it was pretty easy to find those antibodies. And another really striking important thing is that the people that had multiple sclerosis, where they found antibodies in their inside their body, and they found parasites, those people had never been in an area they had epidemic malaria infection. So they hadn't traveled to the hot climates where you may find malaria. And that is something that many of us just thought automatically, that malaria is only in those countries, but that is not the truth. So this study that I'm just talking about right now is a 2001 study, and the author is Kissler, Kissler. I'm going to create a blog post about this. So some people like to just kind of scan the reading, and some people like to listen to me on video. So whichever you prefer, we'll have a blog post on our Live Disease Free website. So make sure that you connect with us. Like, I will be posting how to watch my masterclass training. But if you opt in, then you'll be able to get access to our newsletter that we send out once a week with all of this research, so that you can have this and share it with doctors, share it with not just neurologists, but share it with people that are open to integrative health. So your naturopathic physicians, nurse practitioners, chiropractors, anyone who may not be only treating MS, but they're interested in integrative health, because these parasites are not just in multiple sclerosis. We have specific ones, and other diseases have different parasites. The title of this study is called, "Is Multiple Sclerosis Caused by a Silent Infection with Malarial Parasites?" Is multiple sclerosis caused by a silent infection with malarial parasites? And then the second sentence is histological epidemiological approach, part 1. So historical epidemiological approach, part 1. Oh, that was a tongue twister. All right. So the big thing about malaria is that for many, many years, for over 100 years, different researchers and neurologists and doctors knew that when people had malaria, that it was a demyelinating disease of the central nervous system. So malaria is a demyelinating disease of the central nervous system. That's very important. And way back in 1899, a researcher, doctor by the name of Mannaberg, Mannaberg, 1899, he already believed that MS, so this was his belief, that MS was caused by a malarial infection, because they knew all the symptoms that malaria caused, they were so similar to MS. So he felt that, and other researchers found that also. And MS used to be a very rare neurological disease back in the mid 19th century. Now it is the most common disabling neurological disease in young adults. And MS is rarely found in the tropical zone and in warm climates in general, and its incidence gradually or increases gradually as you move from the equator to the poles. But when you get closer to the North Pole and South Pole, then the incidence of MS decreases again. So MS is rare in the tropical climates, and then as you get closer up to like Canada, et cetera, and some of the European countries, higher incidence, but then as you continue on to the poles, then it decreases. The incidence of MS decreases again. And with MS, they found that the disease is not, in the areas where MS is present, it's not distributed equally. So there's clusters they're finding, especially, for example, in Switzerland and Scandinavia. So when they look at studies that are carried out on looking at the effect of migration, moving from a low-risk area, so like a tropical area, to a high-risk area, or vice versa, at different stages in our life, so at different ages that we would be, that really gives a strong suggestion that there must be a protective factor at the lower altitudes in the tropical areas, so for getting MS. And this factor seems to be affected if MS is diagnosed or if we get MS in early childhood before the age of 15. And after some studies where they looked at, again, like the distribution of multiple sclerosis and compared that to other diseases, again, they found that when they looked at different types of infectious agents, that malaria really stood out. And in the past, when there was malaria infections in the United States in the 1920s and 30s, then they found that when they were treating people for malaria, the MS patients got a lot better. And also history with quinine, originally giving quinine drugs and malarial drugs was really helpful in treating MS. As late as 1963, there was a book, a textbook, Malariology, the most common cerebrospinal syndrome of the central nervous system, where they talked about symptoms of malaria in the central nervous system. And they talked about how patients would have, of course, the sclerosis, so it's a demyelinating disease, but some of the symptoms they would have things like tremors, and their speech would be impaired. They would also have vision impairments, where with the vision they might have repetitive, uncontrolled movements, reduced vision, depth perception could really impact their balance and their coordination, and also having involuntary eye movements. I know with some of my students that are recovering from MS, eyes moving side to side, up and down, or in circular motions, spastic gait, and also impacting their reflexes. Then in 1936, so going back from 1963 to 1936, another textbook, they found that in cases of chronic infection was characterized by neurological disease symptoms. So when people had malaria, they had lots of neurological symptoms, which they quoted, which sometimes resembled multiple sclerosis. And I guess the difference, what it really appears is that with multiple sclerosis, through all of what I've been reading, is that if we have a chronic malarial Babesia protis type infection, it's not like a full-blown where you don't necessarily get a high fever like you would with malaria. And so it may not be easily recognized because it's not in an area where there's an epidemic of malaria or there's high amounts of malaria. So we wouldn't even consider, like in North America, that we would have malaria. I didn't know that you could possibly have malaria. But with MS, it's kind of like a chronic state where you don't get, so it's just like Lyme disease. Sometimes when you get Borrelia, you don't get a high fever. You may not even get a bullseye rash. So sometimes we end up with these chronic states, and they really believe that that is what MS is. And then make sure to type your questions. I see lots of wonderful questions coming in. And just type your comments and your questions. This is really fascinating. For myself, just a little aside before I carry on, I have had a history of, like even with integrated practitioners who are doing energy testing, like, oh, you've got Babesia. Oh, you've got Babesia. And Babesia is a protist. And just some of the symptoms in the past. And I didn't realize that, malaria, what symptoms it causes, because we wouldn't think that we would even have to worry about it if we're in Canada, but apparently we do. So they call it a rare form of malaria. So it's like a silent infection. It's a chronic infection in the body. And it literally has been forgotten. So there's all these researchers through this study where this author has linked all of these different textbooks and all of these different scientists that have been treating, MS, treating malaria, etc. And in the MS textbooks, this has been lost. There is no connection between MS and malaria. So this is something that kind of got dropped, like a lot of other things got dropped, which is really, really sad. In 1889, the American neurologist Morton Price, he reported on 6 cases of malaria, which was followed by MS. So the 6 of his patients ended up with multiple sclerosis and they had malaria before. And then he said, besides these cases, he stated that there were another 3 cases that were similar. And so these patients contracted malaria when they were soldiers in the South during the Civil War. I believe that's in the United States. So they got malaria in the United States while they were fighting in the Civil War, and then they developed multiple sclerosis after that. And I just wanted to make sure that I didn't. So just remember that with this malaria protist, number one, we don't have to go to tropical places, that it is present. We just don't even know how present it is in North America. Maybe some of us do get it if we travel, but most people that have multiple sclerosis or have been treated for malaria and have MS, have been treated for malaria, have shown antibodies and malaria, they haven't traveled to these countries where they have malaria. And then there is also, which I'm going to do more research into, but there's a map of the worldwide distribution of malaria, and they compared that to the map of the worldwide distribution of multiple sclerosis. And where malaria was an epidemic disease, there was no MS. Again, where malaria was an epidemic disease, there was no MS. So it might not just be the difference in temperatures, right? And obviously it isn't, because like MS, it just doesn't even make sense that just a different temperature, we know that it will affect which infections are present for sure. But I guess the thing that, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, is to consider this, is that if you're in an area where there's a lot of malaria, then people are going to be treated for malaria. It's just recognized. It's like, it's not a no-brainer. And so then if malaria caused a lot of the MS, and you're in an area where the malaria, it's understood that malaria is an epidemic and they're treating it regularly, then of course you would have virtually no MS, right? And so that's what they're kind of hinting at, that possibly that could be why that might be the reason why there is virtually no MS in the subtropical, because maybe malaria is more common and it's treated much more, it's recognized and treated more often. And so that's why, and caught probably more quickly, and that's why they feel that it is not a problem, or MS is not a problem in those areas. And so the other feature was the gradual decrease of MS matched with the increase in the incidence of malaria if one moved from the north to the south, from north to south in the northern hemisphere. The same was true vice versa from the southern hemisphere, as the author supposed that epidemic malaria itself could be the reason why MS is so rare. That's what I just shared in those areas. So it's almost like one disease is distinguishing or extinguishing the other. So the malaria, if it's really epidemic in an area and it's treated a lot, that would extinguish MS if MS is kind of like more of a chronic state of the malaria. And so matching each other more or less exactly in the sense that where malaria was epidemic between 1929 and 1938, I believe that's in the United States, there had later been fewer cases of MS than what they would have expected to find. So if there was a higher case of malaria in the United States between 1929 and 1938, they would have been treating the malaria, and so they would have been, and there was reports of a lot of people that had MS that benefited from the malaria treatments. So that would, if you've treated malaria well enough in a population, then you may find less MS if malaria was a cause of a lot of the MS. So this is like huge. Again, I'm not insinuating that there could not be any other infections that cause multiple sclerosis. It's really what microbes are living right next to the nerves that are being inflamed, right? Which parasites are located in the nerves that are being inflamed. And sometimes it might be different. So like we know that, for example, I've done lots and lots of videos on this. Sometimes you can have a larva of a worm, of a tapeworm, or even those little sacs of the juvenile tapeworms located somewhere even in your vertebrae or in your brain. And that can cause, paralysis, numbness. It depends which nerves are being impacted. But it looks like malaria, when you just start to just research a little bit, like what are the symptoms of acute malaria? What are the symptoms of chronic silent infections of malaria? And you'll see that there are so many similarities. And of course, with animals that have filarial worms in their central nervous system, they have a lot of MS symptoms too. So again, those nerves are inflamed. And we know that Borrelia is really present a lot, and it's been really linked a lot with MS too. So, but the nice thing is that yes, there might be just a few different parasites that are involved, but it's not like it's endless amounts. It looks like there are some really common ones. So the filarial worms for sure, the Borrelia for sure. Fungus is present. I just don't know if it is going to cause the same symptoms, possibly. But for sure, it looks like the malaria or Babesia. Again, it's not just going to be one protist, but the protist is a single-cell parasite. It's much more advanced in its structure compared to bacteria. And it would be like Babesia, which is one of the vector-borne Lyme infections, or it could be one of the different species of malaria. So, conclusion. No, I did all of that. So I'm just going to go over to your questions for a minute and just see if you didn't join us last week, had an amazing time of sharing some wonderful successes of the students. I've got some amazing testimonies that I will be putting up on our YouTube and our website too. So make sure that you also join in on our website, Live Disease Free, because there is no censorship on our website, but livediseasefree.com. There will be videos there also, and that you can read up on our blogs, because I'm really posting a lot of things on our blogs that is incredibly important information. I'm not all about recycling health information. I want to give you like information that will help you to get to the root cause of your disease, so that you can actually know what treatments are best. You'll know what diet is best. You'll know what you're supposed to do. You'll know, like, am I supposed to spend $100,000 to $300,000 on my health? No, you're not. Then you can really focus on and be more cost effective, be more intentional, recover more quickly when you know what's causing your symptoms. And that is the whole Live Disease-Free approach. Hi, Maureen. Hello, Tina. Hi, Maurice. Hello to all of you. So, Maureen, you have primary progressive multiple sclerosis, and you've been told that there isn't anything new for you. Malaria is very interesting. So you have primary progressive MS. What I would do is, I don't know if your neurologist is open to this or not. There's a small number that are. Go to your GP, but find a doctor, take that study that I talked about a couple weeks ago on our blog, the study from Calgary, Alberta, Canada with primary progressive. And the nice thing about this is that it's true that a lot of doctors, they're going to be reluctant to treat parasites because they think, oh, the parasites are just in the third world countries or underdeveloped countries. You can't get parasites in your country, whether it's the UK or Europe or Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the United States. Nothing could be further from the truth, but it's a much harder sell for them to try to get them to support you. But when it comes to using like hydroxychloroquine, again, I'm not advocating that you should get hydroxychloroquine. I'm saying if I were you and you had primary progressive, I would be energy tested to see if that tests well for me. And then if it tests well for you, and then if your doctor prescribes it, so what doctors will prescribe for rheumatoid arthritis and for lupus, they'll prescribe 200 milligrams twice a day for a little while, for a few days, and they might decrease it. You have to be careful with hydroxychloroquine because it can affect your vision. You can get retinal tears. So you have to have your vision tested regularly, and you want to make sure that. And so for us, it's not about living on hydroxychloroquine for the rest of our life. It's about, this is a clue, like if I test well for hydroxychloroquine, if I try using it and it gives me immediate symptom relief, it's like, bingo, I'm on the right track. So then the best thing to do is then to back up and to do all of the implementation of the Live Disease-Free plan, which is stop feeding the parasites. Remember that you'll have more than just the malarial parasite if you have MS. Our students are passing a lot of worms. They also have fungal infections. They also have the other Lyme infections. But sometimes there's one or two of these parasites that are kind of giving us the most grief, like in the forefront of our symptoms. So the key is that there are better ways to treat the malaria. The lower dose of hydroxychloroquine might manage your symptoms for a few years, but then you're dealing with the adverse effects of hydroxychloroquine. So again, I'm not advocating to just go on that. That's not the answer. But if you are able to figure out like what you're dealing with, then you can use better treatments, more targeted treatments, and you should be able to treat it more effectively in a shorter period of time and not live on medications. That's the whole key. That's what we want. Okay, so Maureen, that's because you have primary progressive, that study is just totally, written for primary progressive. And again, the doctors may be more open to saying, okay, well, we prescribe hydroxychloroquine at this low dose for, lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah, okay, I'll prescribe it for you, see if it helps you. They might do it short term, and that could even be a general practitioner too. Hi, Karen and Mike. Hi, Paulette. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Melissa. Any more questions you guys have? You're very welcome, Autumn. And Tina, hello. Facebook user, hello. Considered a malaria type disease and cause similar symptoms in the central nervous system. Go back to the video I did 2 weeks ago, and you'll see that it's shocking, the neurological symptoms that are caused by malaria versus MS. They're so identical. Again, it's like when you have inflammation, you have these infections in your central nervous system, certain nerves, when they become inflamed, they have a duty, they have a responsibility for, sending signals back and forth from wherever it is, from your hand, from your leg, back to your brain. And when those nerves are irritated, when they're inflamed, you're going to get symptoms. And there could be different parasites that are causing the inflammation. So why don't they use quinine for MS? Now you wonder, yeah, totally. Well, there's probably no money in treating parasites. That's probably why it got lost and it's no longer in the textbooks, right? If you look at Ocrevus, some of these newer drugs, they're over $100,000 a year. And hydroxychloroquine these are old drugs. They're cheap. They're not patentable anymore. And your doctor, I'm not saying your doctor is intentionally withholding. It's just that they've been trained in a certain way and they don't know. They're told that this is the way it is and there's no other answer and there are no parasites. And it's so frustrating because we get these curveballs. So there's one of our students, and I'm going to do a live event on this. So there was just a study that's going on, and his daughter, she's in the Live Disease-Free program. She's a young lady. She's in school. She's symptom-free right now. She hasn't treated a lot yet, but she's done the prep phase and she's become symptom-free. And they want her to go into a study of a low-fat study. And they're saying that, increasing the vegetables decreases the incidence of MS, which if it's low carb vegetables, yes, but they want her to go on a low fat diet. And then you look at these studies and look at who funds them. There's just a list of pharmaceutical companies. So very often we get so confused because we're getting misleading information. And I feel that it's probably intentional because, as long as you keep people on the wrong track, you keep them away from the root cause, and then all of these very expensive drugs can continue to be prescribed. And it's awful, but it's really awful. So Sherry, what is the protocol for hydroxychloroquine? Again, you can research this, talk to your doctor, but it's about 200 milligrams twice a day. Higher doses, there's a lot more side effects. Again, you wouldn't continue on that. You'd have to be monitored, and you really pay attention to your vision, right? Because there can be long-term effects. But it's just like if you have a lot of symptoms of malaria, and if you've been energy tested and you test well for malaria drugs, Babesia drugs, then that's probably one that you really need to focus on. And it's all about treating things effectively. So like with hydroxychloroquine at the low dose, that's not treating it effectively. That's kind of like slowing it down, but then you have to stay on a drug forever. And again, the adverse effects are not good. Hi, Hannah, or Hanan. Is there a blood test that you can do? Yes, there are blood tests, I'm sure, for malaria. But again, good luck trying to get a blood test for malaria. They'll say, have you traveled? And you'll say, no, I haven't traveled into, an area where there's an epidemic, and they probably won't do it. Same thing with Babesia. It depends what country you're in. Canada is terrible. You cannot treat parasites. You can't get tested for parasites. It would be more like through a university where they're doing research and they have research funds and they're looking into it. So maybe we can link up with the University of Calgary. A shout out to them. I'm really impressed with the research that they've been releasing over the last few years. I've done a few looked at reviews of their studies where they're talking about dysbiosis and multiple sclerosis. And then they've come up with that hydroxychloroquine study. So they're great research. It looks like they're a little less biased towards the pharmaceuticals, or maybe that department is, I don't know, or that group of scientists. So unfortunately, right now, we don't have good tests for that. So Sherry, what is due her antiparasitic drug? I'm not sure what that means. Basically, for treating malaria, hydroxychloroquine. There is a new, I can't remember, I should have looked it up, but it starts with an M. There is another drug that treats malaria. Interesting, if you go onto the CDC website, the Center of Disease Control for the United States, and you look up malaria and you look up the treatment for malaria, their treatment of choice is called artesunate, which is the extract of wormwood that is an injectable form. So you cannot inject wormwood extract. So this is the Sweet Annie version of wormwood. It's there's different types of wormwood, and that's a parasite herb. The Sweet Annie wormwood, the extract from that is called artemisinin. And when they make this special patented form where it's something that they can actually inject into us, and it's really cost effective, very, very cost effective, very cheap, and it works really well for cancer, for malaria, but it's not available anymore in the United States because it probably was really interfering with the industries of chronic disease. So in some countries, Dr. Klinghardt mentioned, in some countries in Europe, you can still get artesunate, and it would have to be administered by a healthcare professional IV, which is brutal, but that's the way it is. So we know that the wormwood extract artemisinin can be helpful, and you have to work with a practitioner to make sure that you know how much to take. If you don't take enough, it's not going to work. If you take too much, wormwood is toxic. So this is all for educational purposes. I don't want to hurt anybody. But wormwood, and it could be that both, like the traditional wormwood that you find in the stores. But again, you need to work with someone so you can actually address these infections and not just kind of just slow them down a little bit. I mean, that's a good start, but you want to just treat them well. There is also a new drug for babesia, a brand new one, and it is, I think it's called tefenoquine. And I don't know if that will be effective enough for babesia and for malaria, but apparently for babesia, the tefenoquine would be more helpful than using the Malarone or Mepron, one of those two. Maybe Mepron is maybe for malaria, but there's an M parasite drug. I should have looked it up, but because we haven't really, we haven't considered malaria, right, with our students because we didn't know this huge connection. So fascinating. Yes, you're so very welcome. What you can do is you can help spread this information. You can really, like when I do the blog post, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you share that blog post because it'll have the audio, it'll have the video, it'll have the video plus the written. And then that way, if people just want to scan the written part, but the only way things are going to change is to get this information back into the MS textbooks. So do these worms create white plaques in the brain? So a white plaque is basically a pocket of inflammation. Your immune system is fighting something. So malaria is not a worm. The filarial worms are small round worms, but they carry they carry Borrelia for sure. That's been proven, but they could carry other parasites too. And the lesions that we have, they're not just in multiple sclerosis. They're in people over 50 years old. They have lesions in their central nervous system, people that have autism or Crohn's disease, and probably many other conditions. They also have lesions in the central nervous system. So we use that as a diagnostic tool to diagnose MS, but that doesn't mean that lesions are only in MS. They're in many other conditions. And we know, I've shared lots of research that parasites cause lesions in the central nervous system. So it's not always going to be the same parasite causing the lesion. That is just known in science, and it's really interesting how that is not relayed to our doctors. You're very welcome. So your mother had malaria. Karen, your mother had malaria at the age of 17, lived in Nashville, Tennessee. Older sister had fibromyalgia. Interesting. You were diagnosed in 2000 with MS, and now at 68 years old, trying to do the diet the best you can, not having coffee, bread, soft drinks, eating salads every day. So getting the carbs low enough, people notice huge improvements in their health, and that is decreasing the activity of these parasites, decreasing inflammation, but the diet will not get rid of the parasites. We have to treat them also. You have a walker and a cane, and now you can walk outside. That is so awesome. You are desperate to detox. I would say more desperate to treat these infections. So make sure to reach out to us, Karen. I don't know if you are one of our students. Sorry, I have a number of students and I don't recognize the last name. So I'll share with you at the end how, if you want to find out more information about this plan on how to treat and recover, that's what we help students do, is to get ready to treat, to access the proper treatments, to access the proper tests, keep it as cost effective as possible. This is the cheapest way you can recover from a parasitic infestation if you have any kind of disease. It's through the Live Disease-Free plan. Oh, the volume keeps going in and out. Sorry, I don't know why. You had double voice. So did you answer my question? You can't hear, sorry. I'll have to go back and listen to the replay. I don't see a lot of other people that had problems with the sound. So there's a whole bunch more questions. I'll just go through a couple more, and then if you do have more questions, type them in the question box. I will definitely come back and answer them. I am going to be moving off. I will be still on Facebook, but it's one thing to share the research, but there's so much that I want to share with you of, more detail of what you can start doing to start feeling better. And I can't do that on either Facebook or YouTube due to the just huge amount of censorship. So what we have done in the past is like a Zoom call, or that's probably the easiest for me, but then you'd need to be linked with us. So you just need to opt in. So we have your email address. That way you have our newsletters, when I'm doing these live trainings, and then you also can join us when I'm talking about, different simple things that are safe that I know you can start doing for treating, and talking about different therapies, et cetera, that I can't talk about here. So make sure if you want that information, make sure that you're connected with me. Would ivermectin be a substitute for hydroxychloroquine? No, it would not. So ivermectin will treat roundworms, and hydroxychloroquine will treat different types, like the Malaria Parasites. So that is the problem, is that there are different parasite treatments for different types of parasites. And you have to use what works for the parasites that you're dealing with. What do you think of stonebreaker tea? You can take it. It's not going to stop your MS, Laura. It's that I believe the stonebreaker tea, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that has to do with helping to break up gallstones. So when we have these parasites, they can definitely get into the liver gallbladder meridian. We definitely do liver gallbladder flushes once we're feeling better, but it's not going to stop the parasites in any way. Yes, such similar symptoms plus demyelination. Again, chronic Lyme, chronic babesia, chronic malaria is challenging to treat. And that's why if you really want to recover and get over it, then you've got to work with someone. If you just play around with, I know that there was some kind of homemade, quinine, or I don't know what it is, where you can mix different things together. Or even just taking wormwood, it might give you a little bit of symptom relief, but if you're not using the right amount, or it's not reaching where, let's say it's not crossing the blood-brain barrier, then you might have short-term relief, but you're not getting better. So my goal is, I really hope that we create more and more awareness, we get more practitioners involved, and then they're going to treat it a lot better, a lot more effectively. You are so happy today. Rejoice. Awesome. All right. And see if there's last couple here. Is malaria contagious? So I didn't even go into, there's this whole thing about mosquitoes and malaria. I didn't go into that at all. But just when you look at MS, it looks like it's not contagious in the sense of passing it from one person to the other. I think that, like even if you think about getting it from a mosquito, I would assume that's probably how it is passed. That's traditionally what we're told. We'll find out as I research more, but it's a perfect storm. So for myself, I can just speak for myself. So I had dysbiosis from a very young age. So I'm not going to go into, but when I was born, I was colicky and didn't tolerate, gluten type cereals. So that already shows that I had dysbiosis at that age. And then we were from the generation where my mom, every time we had a sore throat or a fever, our doctor would put us on antibiotics. So I was on antibiotics quite a few times, just for different, like strep throat, bronchitis, but it could have been viral. Maybe I wasn't even supposed to take antibiotics. And then I was also treated for acne for several months on tetracycline. So I was the perfect victim for parasites, for problems. And it really looks that the people that will have more of these, other infections, which may be partially opportunistic, is that our natural defense has been so compromised, and that really makes our immune system weaker, because our immune system is battling all of these different parasites that are building up, and then we end up maybe getting infected with malaria. And because our immune system is already overwhelmed with the dysbiosis we're dealing with, then our immune system may not fight it well enough, and then we end up in a chronic state where it really makes its way, into the central nervous system eventually, because we know it's not a sterile environment. And then we end up with chronic neurological diseases. And then it's the environment that will affect whether we get disabled more quickly or more slowly. So it's our stress level, it's what we eat, it's the medications that we're taking, how much we're sleeping, if we're not sleeping at all. So there's many factors, the wireless radiation, the heavy metal exposure, all of these things will really really help us to understand why some of us become more disabled more quickly and others become disabled more slowly. All right, so that's it. I'm going to stop here because there's a lot more questions. Go ahead and type your questions in the question box. So where to go from here? If this is the first time you've met me and this is like exciting, but it's like I need to get a little bit more background information, then simply just watch some of my videos. It's really neat when I talk to people like, I've watched all your videos. I can't believe I'm talking to you. I'm just an average person, right? But it is really cool that it's helping people. This is why I do this. This is my give back to you so that you understand what you're dealing with and so that you can actually seek out help. If you need help, you can see us. We will help you. We have a proven plan to treat these parasites. We have a lot of experience to really help you to just get ready to treat as quickly as possible in the most cost-effective way. If you're ready for that, if you want support, then watch my masterclass training, which is, there will be link in the description and it'll be linked, if you ask in your comments, we'll set it in there. And you can become a wellness champion. You can join on this journey. We've had a lot of students join in the last couple of weeks, which we're so excited. Students all over the world. We're supporting in India and all over Europe and Australia, New Zealand, Canada. So as long as you can speak English, we can help you. So you can get access to treatments all over. So I just got a report from our student in India. We've had a couple, not that many, because it's tough in India. It's very different than here. And he's doing really well, just finished the first parasite treatment. His wife is a physiotherapist, and she's noticing already muscle tone improvements with him just with starting the treatment. So really exciting and literally just starting the treatments. If you want to help us to bring change, if you want to help us to get the truth out, please share this video, like it, subscribe to our Live Disease Free YouTube channel so that you know when we are going to be releasing the next training video, and make sure to opt in if you want our newsletter. If you want to know when we're doing these, it'll probably start with Zoom. I think that's probably the easiest, where I can talk more about some of this, like herbs and oxidizing agents and things that we're using to help treat these infections. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful day and we'll talk to you next week. Take care and bye-bye for now.